This presentation is being brought to you by the Tipton Auto Group, Brownsville's oldest continually operating automobile dealership.
Bottled water's gone underneath the bridge. With me and my family in this house. It's 319 East Elizabeth. There was always referred to in our family as over 319, let's go over there. I owned the home here from 1997 till about the year 2003. I bought it out of the estate. And it was quite an experience to live in this house. You can imagine about 7,000 plus square feet of home and in the old manor. I will let you know that there are secret passages in this house, on exactly where they are. I did get in there right now if I wanted to because of a certain secret passage. But no, it was a beautiful residence for Patricia and I. We really enjoyed it.
This gargantuan house claims a history that is as extensive as the house's grounds. It is referred to as the Kowalski-Fernandez house. The initial owners, the son and family of Polish immigrants Bernard and Sophie Kowalski, had the structure built in the year 1890. He was Benjamin Kowalski, a very successful citizen who had held the office of local postmaster and mayor in the 40-plus years after his father's arrival in Brownsville in 1846. The Kowalski parents fled Poland, escaping the chaos and bloodshed of the Russian partitioning wars of the late 1840s, and first settled in New Orleans. As General Zachary Taylor was gathering his expeditionary forces to determine a hard Texas border along the Rio Grande, Bernard signed on and found his way to Brownsville. Bernard was quite a decorated soldier, not only of that war, which developed into the Mexican-American War, but also of the 1861-1865 Civil War as it unfolded in South Texas. Bernard and Sophie had two sons who were influential in the development of early Brownsville, Benjamin, and then there was Louis. Benjamin was the more, successful of the two, having held public office under the title of postmaster and then mayor. Louis held the management of Swift and Company, a meatpacking house, and various other enterprises. It was Louis's daughter, Rosalie, who married Miguel Fernandez in 1899. These two began their married life in a residence at 402 East Washington, right across from Juana Fernandez's home. You might say that they outgrew that home by having 17 children over the first 18 years of their marriage. Coming up into the year 1917, Miguel cast around with the desire to build a larger home on the 4th Street and East Washington site, but was discouraged from doing that because it was the beginning of the First World War, and he was told that supplies would not be made available or accessible. His wife's uncle, Benjamin Kowalski, met with him, disclosing that he was moving to Houston. And so a more practical solution would be for Miguel to buy the house at 319 East Elizabeth, and he did. For the following 80 years, 319 overflowed with Miguel Fernandez's children and family members and a gaiety that was truly wonderful for that house. Various children graduated in and out of that particular house, 319, and the structures on the grounds of it were utilized, obviously, for the various extensions of the children. The unit that was the servants' quarters at what would be the eastern, back on the alley level there, that was the boys' room, we called it. And so, of course, the boys of the time grew up there. And then you had the upper floors there that were dedicated to the girls. Then you had a stables area that was over to the north side, which is now a spa. But the house in general was beautifully oriented and designed with a courtyard in the backyard and all of that in order to accommodate a very, very friendly atmosphere. I remember my first introduction to that house was probably about 1966, 67, thereabouts. I was in high school and I had a curiosity about it because I'd been told about the family and that was an extension of our family. And so I knocked on the door, and my Aunt Amelia was the last one to live in that house. And she was an old maid aunt, never married. And she was called Miss Amelia. And she greeted me at that time, and I really enjoyed our visit. I visited there several times with her. And then when I came back to this part of the country in the early 80s, I visited it with my father, and thankfully I have photographs of those visitations with Aunt Amelia. By then she was in her 80s, and then when I came back to Brownsville in about 1994 thereabouts, she's getting into her 90s, and I would visit her as well. In fact, a funny thing that when I met my wife to be, Patricia, we were on the island there, and I said, I want to take you to introduce you to several members of my family. And so I said, I want to introduce you to my great grandfather. And so she said, wow, great grandfather, quite, longevity in that family. So I took her to the cemetery. That's where I introduced her to my great grandfather. But then afterwards, I took her over to see Aunt Amelia, which is like by that time, 93, 94. And then I'm sure it registered in Patricia's mind that well, this family does have great longevity. Look at the 93-year-old woman that was there. In the year 1997, I returned to Brownsville to live with Patricia, and I visited, of course, Aunt Amelia on numerous occasions, and then she passed away at about mid-year in 1997, and I negotiated with the estate. With the executor at the time was her brother Louis Fernandez, and I don't know, he was probably 89 years old at that point, and I bought the house out of the estate. So I know that it comprises one half of a city block, if you can imagine that big house on half of a city block, right? The other half I negotiated to buy, so I had the entire city block, and that's where I had my antique business for the years that I had. I had that house for 5 years and thoroughly enjoyed it, but it was a beautiful experience. After the Kowalskis moved out, and actually it was Benjamin Kowalski moved out. The rest of the Kowalskis, a lot of them stayed. They were here, but then you had the takeover of those grounds by Miguel Fernandez, and of course Miguel Fernandez Sr. was my great grandfather's brother. And then his son, Miguel Fernandez Jr., was the one that purchased the house from Benjamin Kowalski. I remember Rosalie had the master bedroom downstairs. The grand salon that they had for the dining room was always set up to receive guests. It was a great long table with the crystal and with the silver and the great chandelier and all of that. And the different members of the Miguel Fernandez family would come into town and they would party at that house. It was a great venue for all of that. And Miguel Fernandez actually utilized that house as the base for the Noriega plantation, which was Rancho Viejo. His two other dominant brothers were in charge of the banks, so they didn't deal with the Noriega very much at all, other than by the books, that they kept on it. And so that was the base right there for the Noriega plantation. And so we're getting up into years now, and I visited that house fairly frequently when I would come through Brownsville, and I would see my old Aunt Amelia. And so Patricia just fell in love with her. That was just such a beautiful lady. She had her little ukulele. She was a teacher for so many years, and she was a perfect teacher for that. So the encounter that they had there was so dear. We lived in that house for 5 years. Thoroughly enjoyed it. When I first took it over, I must say that there probably hadn't been $1.50 put into it in terms of paint and various other things in the past 20 years prior to that. So I invested heavily in bringing it back, bringing the modern wiring, the plumbing, the painting, and all of that up to standard, and really brought it into a livable condition. Refurbished the patio, made a bistro there that was just par excellence. It was like something out of New Orleans. And brought the carpet grass in, did a little landscaping, and it really turned into quite a little heaven on earth. Beautiful, beautiful place once it was rehabbed and all of that. Now like I say, I had it for 5 years, and then I sold it on paper to Miss Eturia, and then she turned it around in order to sell it to Sandy Stillman, who had just come back from Hot Springs, Arkansas, or something like that. He was moving back to Brownsville, so he bought it. So you can see the level of the pedigrees that owned the house, starting with Benjamin Kowalski, then Miguel Fernandez, and then myself, Miss Eturia, and then Sandy Stillman. Sandy still owns it, by the way. And that house is carried on. It's a grande dame on the street side there. And I'm so happy that Sandy finalized the construction and put all of the fence along the front there, and the balustrade for the overhang of the second story balcony, and the colonnade, those columns that were there. All of that was blown away by the hurricane in 1933. And a portion of the upstairs wall on the south side was blown in. The girls were in that room at the time, and they were all going crazy, sheltering in a more protected room. It was quite a hurricane. Anyway, that fine structure weathered many hurricanes, and to finally arrive at where we are today. It's a grand example of how historic preservation was done in the proper manner. Sandy did it, the rest of it, and we were half and half, I guess. And it produced a house that Brownsville could be proud of, showing what that neighborhood was like. When I first bought that house, I went up to the second story. The shutters were nailed shut since the 33 hurricane. And I pried those shutters open, and I looked out there. I said, oh my God, look at this. There was a taxi service directly to my front left. There was a AAA adult bookstore directly in front of the house. Over here was a trucking company, and over here was a used tire company. You see the merchant mix that we had there. So I got together with a real estate broker, Vance Wilson, at the time, and I said, we got to change this. This neighborhood was so beautiful back at the turn of the century and beyond, for that matter. And all of this that's on the horizon right now, we've got to go ahead and position new owners for these structures, for the lots, for the property, in order to clean up their act. And I actually went into City Hall and took part in a rescripting of ordinances to eliminate the sexually oriented businesses and we moved them out of town. And then I contacted the various people who owned the tire agency and this, that, and the other. And we placed those particular properties in better hands. And then I really, one of the entities that I wanted on the merchant mix was an ice cream parlor because you can imagine little boutiques and all of that. Now, I did have a boutique that was renting from me in 319, but I couldn't find one. I even went to Cuernavaca because Patricia said there's a beautiful ice cream factory there. Maybe they'll be one, and they were this far away from coming through, but that deal fell through. So I said I got that taste of ice cream in my mouth. I really want that. So I said, I guess I'll have to do it myself. And so I did. And that's where I started my ice cream business in the courtyard, in that bistro courtyard there. That was phenomenal. Got written up in Southern Living magazine as one of the top food finds in the country, and it was just a delightful environment. Those of you that do remember it, the fountains and all of that, and the decor, that you just look like you're stepping back into New Orleans and to time, 1890, when that house was born. So there you have it. I say Sandy bought it in, let's see, it was the year 2003, I think it was, thereabouts. And Sandy hangs on to real estate. He hasn't done anything with it. He had an attorneys group in there in the very beginning, but now it's just locked up. I have no idea what he has plans for it. I would hope that it's something good. But anyway, that house has seen a life, a truly interesting life, and it's not over yet. I can imagine what else is going to, grow in the shade of that house. So there you have it, a wonderful structure of Brownsville's past that really carried on and on and on to a degree that made a lot of people very, very happy. All right, good day. With the owners that have had control over this property for those many years, there are certain modules that apply to them if one wants to get an idea of what happened in this house during the respective periods. So I'll go into the first one, and obviously it's the Kowalskis, and the Kowalskis were a very social family, whether it be among their Jewish cohorts or just in society. If you can imagine, he was the mayor of Brownsville. So you had that element of as a feature of that house. But there's unfortunately there aren't any photographs that show people in parties or that type of thing. But if you just close your eyes, knowing what they were like, which I do, the furniture scheme was different to a great degree, and that's what happened in society when 1890 versus going on up into 1917. All right, the Kowalskis were very, very much into high Victorian antiques. And those pieces that I have from that family indicate such, and they're beautiful pieces. They really had quite a sophisticated taste, not only in the pieces that I saw from the Benjamin Kowalski house. I've been in the Louis Kowalski house, and you can see that they were high Victorian era antiques. And now, let's go on up into Benjamin Kowalski. Now, hang on. All right. Now, let's go on up into the Miguel Fernandez era and all of the characteristics that changed in that house, and how it basically was a makeover on not your classical Victorian antiques, but at the time of 1917, you had a prevalence of Eastlake and also of Stickley, which is and the Frank Lloyd Wright movement and very linear, very prairie. So that's what he went into full force. He loved that. And so he got rid of his wife's uncle, that really didn't mean anything. I guess they were both on the same bandwagon to really enjoy the Stickley furniture, the Frank Lloyd Wright type of designs, much more modern. It's a modernistic type of a furniture. And those pieces, when I gave the estate sale, that I saw there, that indicated, well, what's this house? What did this house look like? Well, basically, the house did not change very much from 1917 to when I liquidated the furniture in an auction in 1997. So you had a lot of the more of the modern era type of it, what we now call antiques, that were there. Also, something that was very interesting is that the fronts of the fireplaces were totally redone to reflect more of a Frank Lloyd Wright type of an appearance to them. Is the very linear, very brick, and as opposed to what you would have had during the Kowalski period, which was the older type Victorian. And mind you, when I was underneath the house and I looked, I was doing down there for something else, probably wasn't wiring or something like that, and I saw shards of old tile. And this is obviously when they were redoing the fronts of the fireplaces and the bricklayers were doing their things would fall. And I saw these shards, and I just said, wow, because I was in the precious stone business for 10 years, and I saw this color, and it looked like imperial jade. Well, the tile that came off of that setup that the Kowalskis had was that way, and I can imagine what it looked like. Oh God, it surely wasn't just a light chocolate colored brick. It was in a beautiful tile with finesse that had an imperial jade look to it. So that's a clue right there at what they had. And as I said, the furniture that they pretty well started with, my thought is, knowing the period furniture that they ended with in that house. And when we had the auction, that was one chance of the very few homes that were left in Brownsville to capture an entire household of antiques. The other one went off in a lot, as was, and that was the Wagner Brown house. It was Francis Wagner when Francis died, and the sons were away, of course, but nonetheless, Francis maintained that house in the style that Martha Landrum and of course Robert Wagner, they built it on up. It was a Glavec house to begin with, Glavec Brown, and then the successive movements of Martha coming in, Wagner, that put its imprint upon. But the point I'm getting at is that was a whole house that remained. And it still remains. Sandy bought that house, and it is intact. Complete time capsule of the furniture that was there from the very beginning. So what a treasure that would be. Okay, so we're in Miguel Fernandez era. Now we're going to go on up to my era. Of course, when I sold the antiques in auction, that was all distributed off to the various pockets of the families, the proceeds of the sale. They bought, and the public bought various pieces, and it would go back into the kitty for, to be distributed among the heirs. And so I basically ended up with a house that was devoid of what the original furniture was all about, and I brought my own antiques. And I had an antique shop in there. Okay, so that's the next, I guess, influence that was in there. But it was all antiques for sale. I moved an entire house full of antiques in 1 month. Every month, I bring down trailers from Central Texas. But let's get off. Before we do that, in order to be appropriate in the line of progression, what I did to that house in the remake of the wiring and the remake of scraping down things that had a crust on them forever, painting, structural improvements, all of that. There was a vast amount of work that needed to be done, and I did that. Put roofs on the servants' quarters that were out in the patio there on the side that is 4th Street and the alley didn't have a roof, nor did the carriage house. Didn't have a roof. I put roofs on those. So you can see the activity that was going on during the time when I took over it. I developed a plan in my mind about what I wanted to be refurbed, what I wanted the initial look to be like, and I actually was aiming it towards that bistro, that lovely bistro that was in the courtyard there. And landscaping had to be completely reworked. There was nothing. There was no landscaping to speak of at all there. It was just like a barren wasteland. But we brought it all back. We brought that into an attractive setting again. And then, all right, so far as the antique endeavor, yeah, the interior of the house was filled with antiques, and it was rotating and all of that. And then you had the bistro. I outfitted the patio in that, and there was a going business that was there. And the servants' quarters was the base for the inside tables that were there for the bistro, and then in the patio outside. There were all kinds of the tables as well. You look like you were really in New Orleans for all of that. That was developed up, and my ice cream business was started there, and that was very, very beautiful memories for that. And when I evacuated that house, obviously there was nothing in the interior and nothing in all my patio furniture. I took with me. So it was a basic barren shell, which it maintained that there was no reason to put commercial furniture or commercial kitchen or whatever else during when Sandy, well, for me to leave it and then Sandy to proceed, because that wasn't his bailiwick. He didn't want to get off into managing a bistro. And so and Sandy went through with his buddy. He went through a complete finish off of that beautiful house, and I redid a lot of the floors professionally with the grinder and the stain and the whole thing. And I think he finished off some of those, and did the little finesse work like the cornices and all of that. So there you have it. Each successive owner had a pocket of influence over how that house was finally developed and came to be, and currently is, for that matter. Here's a little factoid that you will enjoy. If you look at this photograph here, you're going to see a bungalow cottage to the left of the big house. And that particular cottage, I have the plans for it, was built in 1909, obviously by Jose Colunga. Now, who lived in that house? The Deos. If you remember Vanny Tilden, Van Deo, and that whole family, they lived there. They started Vanny Tilden in the kitchen behind that house, and they sold, Mrs. Deo sold her cakes and all of that there. And then the next move for them, they were very successful in doing that. And the next move for them, of course, was to go over on Washington Street. I don't know what block it would be. It would probably be about the 600 block of Washington Street. And they stayed there for God only knows how many years, and really made a name for themselves. So that was the beginning of Vanny Tilden right there.